$35 trillion. That's how much America owes right now. And it's growing by $1 million every 30 seconds. Rome didn't fall in a day, but there was a moment when everyone knew it was too late to turn back. Are we living in that moment? Let's start with a number that sounds fake. $35 trillion. Right out, $35 trillion. If you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you over 95,000 years to spend that much money. Humanity has only existed as a species for about 300,000 years. But here's what makes it worse. This isn't just a big number. It's a growing monster. In the year 2000, America's debt was $5.7 trillion. 25 years later, it's multiplied by 6. And the acceleration is terrifying. In 2008, we added about $500 billion to the debt each year. By 2020, we were adding over $3 trillion in a single year. In 2023 alone, America paid $659 billion just in interest payments. Not paying down the debt, just interest. That's more than we spend on our entire military budget for veterans' care. Think about what $659 billion could buy. Universal pre-K for every child in America? Done, with change left over. Rebuilding every crumbling bridge in the country? Easy. Ending homelessness? We could do it 3 times over. Instead, we're paying that money to bondholders, to China, to Japan, to wealthy investors. We're paying them for the privilege of having borrowed money in the past. Now here's the truly scary part. We're not just in debt. We're trapped in a debt spiral. Because as the debt grows, the interest we owe grows. And as the interest grows, we have to borrow more money to pay the interest, which increases the debt, which increases the interest. It's a snake eating its own tail, and the snake is getting hungrier. But you've heard these numbers before. Big government debt. Politicians have been warning about it for decades, right? So why should you care now? Because something has fundamentally changed. And to understand what, we need to go back 2,000 years. Ask anyone how Rome fell, and they'll tell you about barbarians at the gates. Germanic tribes sacking the city. The last emperor being deposed in 476 AD. But that's like saying a person died because their heart stopped. Technically true, but it misses the whole story. What really killed the patient? At its height, Rome was the most advanced civilization the world had ever seen. They had concrete, indoor plumbing, a road system so good that some of those roads are still in use today. They had a professional army, a massive bureaucracy, and an economy that stretched from Britain to Egypt. The Roman Empire, at its peak, controlled the entire Mediterranean. They called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. Imagine controlling an area so vast that you could claim an entire ocean. But here's what people forget. All of that cost money. Massive amounts of money. The Roman military alone required constant funding. You had legions stationed across 3 continents. You had to pay them, feed them, arm them, and give them a pension when they retired. And Rome kept expanding, which meant more territory to defend, which meant more soldiers, which meant more costs. Then there was the infrastructure. Those famous roads? Expensive. The aqueducts bringing water to cities? Incredibly expensive. The public baths, the forums, the temples? All expensive. But the biggest cost of all was something called bread and circuses. The Roman government figured out early that if you wanted to keep people from revolting, you needed to keep them fed and entertained. So they gave out free grain to hundreds of thousands of citizens. They put on elaborate games at the Colosseum. They subsidized olive oil and wine. It was the world's first welfare state. And just like modern welfare states, it was extremely popular with the people receiving benefits and extremely expensive for the government providing them. So how did Rome pay for all of this? At first, through conquest. Every time Rome conquered a new territory, they took its wealth. Gold, silver, slaves, land. Conquest was profitable. War paid for itself. But eventually, Rome ran out of places to conquer. By the 2nd century AD, the empire had reached its maximum size. They controlled everything worth controlling. The barbarians beyond the borders were too poor and too scattered to be worth the cost of conquest. So the loot stopped coming in, but the bills kept coming. This is where things started to go wrong. And this is where the parallel to America becomes chilling. The Roman emperors faced a choice. They could cut spending, which would mean a smaller military, which would mean they couldn't defend the borders, which would mean losing territory. Or they could cut the free grain and entertainment, which would mean riots in Rome itself. Neither option was politically possible. So they chose option 3. They cheated. Rome began debasing its currency. The denarius, Rome's silver coin, started out as pure silver. But gradually, the government started mixing in cheaper metals. First a little copper, then more copper, then mostly copper with just a coating of silver. Within a century, the silver denarius was only about 5% silver. The government could make 20 coins for the price of what used to make one. They paid their soldiers with this fake money. They paid their contractors. They paid everyone. And for a while it worked. But then people caught on. If your money is worth less, you charge more. Prices skyrocketed. Inflation went through the roof. A measure of wheat that cost half a denarius suddenly cost 50 denarii. Then 500. The Roman economy collapsed into chaos. Merchants refused to accept government money. Trade broke down. People stopped producing goods because the money they'd be paid in would be worthless by the time they finished. The government needed more money to deal with the inflation they created, so they debased the currency even more, which caused more inflation, which required more money. Sound familiar? But here's the part that really matters. The part that keeps historians up at night when they look at modern America. Rome didn't collapse because of one bad emperor or one bad decision. Rome collapsed because they built a system that required constant growth. They built an empire that needed to keep expanding to pay for itself. And when the expansion stopped, the whole thing came apart. The barbarians, who eventually sacked Rome in 476, they were just the cleanup crew. Rome had already killed itself. The body just hadn't stopped moving yet. Let's jump forward to 1945. World War II has just ended. Europe is in ruins. Asia is devastated. The Soviet Union has lost 27 million people. Germany is shattered. Japan has been bombed into submission. And America? America is untouched. Not only untouched, but stronger than ever. While the rest of the world was destroying itself, America had spent 4 years building the most powerful industrial machine in human history. We had the factories. We had the workers. We had the technology. And we had all our infrastructure intact. Every other major industrial power was a smoking crater, and they all needed to rebuild. Guess who they bought everything from? America became the world's manufacturer, the world's banker, and the world's supermarket all at once. We made half of everything produced on planet Earth. Half. But that was just the beginning. In 1944, before the war even ended, the Allied powers met at a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. They created a new financial system for the post-war world. And at the center of that system was the US dollar. Here's how it worked. The dollar was backed by gold. $35 could be exchanged for 1 ounce of gold, guaranteed by the US government. And every other currency in the world was pegged to the dollar. If you were France or Japan or Brazil, your currency's value was based on its exchange rate with the dollar, which was backed by gold. The dollar became the world's reserve currency. It was as good as gold. Actually, it was better than gold because you could use it more easily. This gave America an extraordinary power. We could print dollars, and the world would accept them as payment. Not because they trusted our good intentions, but because those dollars could always be exchanged for gold at Fort Knox. And we had a lot of gold. At the end of World War II, America held about 20,000 tons of gold. That was roughly 60% of all the official gold reserves in the entire world. We had it all. For 25 years, this system worked beautifully. Americans lived in the greatest prosperity the world had ever seen. The middle class exploded. A factory worker could afford a house, a car, and could send his kids to college. One income could support an entire family comfortably. We built the interstate highway system. We went to the moon. We created the internet. America was the undisputed champion of the world, and everyone knew it. But there was a problem brewing. And just like Rome, it came down to costs spiraling out of control. By the late 1960s, America was fighting a war in Vietnam that was costing billions of dollars. At the same time, President Lyndon Johnson had launched the Great Society programs: Medicare, Medicaid, expanded Social Security, the war on poverty. These were massive, new government commitments. Good programs that helped millions of people. But they were expensive. Very expensive. The government was spending far more money than it was taking in through taxes. The deficit was exploding. And remember, under the Bretton Woods system, every dollar was supposed to be backed by gold. Other countries started to notice. France was the first to sound the alarm. In the mid-1960s, French President Charles de Gaulle looked at how many dollars America was printing and did the math. He sent French Navy ships to America loaded with dollars and demanded they be exchanged for gold, as was his right under the Bretton Woods Agreement. America had to pay up. Fort Knox started emptying out. Other countries took note and started doing the same thing. Britain, Germany, Japan, they all started exchanging their dollars for gold. By 1971, America faced a crisis. We had printed far more dollars than we had gold to back them. We had about $15 billion in gold left, but there were over $80 billion worth of dollars held by foreign governments who could demand gold at any moment. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on television and made an announcement that changed the world forever. He said that America would no longer exchange dollars for gold. The gold standard was over. He called it temporary. It wasn't. It was one of the most important economic decisions in human history, and most people barely remember it happened. Overnight, the dollar went from being backed by gold to being backed by nothing. Well, not nothing exactly. It was backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. In other words, the dollar was valuable because the U.S. government said it was valuable and because everyone agreed to believe it. This is what economists call fiat currency. Currency by decree. It has value because the government declares it has value. Now, this might sound like a disaster. And in the short term, it caused massive problems. Inflation skyrocketed. The value of the dollar plummeted. The 1970s were economically terrible for most Americans. But here's what's fascinating. In the long run, this change gave America even more power, not less. Here's why. When the dollar was backed by gold, there was a limit to how many dollars we could print. We could only print as many as we had gold to back them. But once we went off the gold standard, that limit disappeared. And then America pulled off one of the most brilliant economic maneuvers in history. In 1974, the U.S. made a deal with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. And in exchange, America would provide military protection to Saudi Arabia. Soon, all the oil-producing countries followed suit. Oil, the most important commodity in the world, the thing that makes modern civilization possible, could only be bought with U.S. dollars. Think about what this meant. If you were Japan and you needed oil, you first had to buy U.S. dollars. If you were Germany, France, Brazil, China, anyone, you needed dollars to buy oil. Everyone, everywhere needed dollars. This created constant global demand for U.S. currency. And that meant the U.S. could print money and the world would absorb it. We could run deficits that would destroy any other country, and we'd be fine. We could spend more than we took in, year after year after year, and the consequences would be delayed. Maybe forever. This is called the exorbitant privilege. The phrase was coined by a French finance minister in the 1960s, and you can hear the jealousy in those words. America could borrow at lower interest rates than anyone else. We could run up debts that would bankrupt other nations. We could print money without immediately causing inflation, all because the dollar was the world's reserve currency. And so we did. We started spending and borrowing and spending some more. Reagan increased the debt. Bush increased it more. Clinton slowed it down, but didn't stop it. Bush Jr. sent it soaring with 2 wars and tax cuts. Obama added trillions fighting the Great Recession. Trump added more with more tax cuts and spending. Biden added even more with COVID relief and infrastructure. Democrat, Republican, it didn't matter. The debt kept growing because there was no immediate consequence. We had the exorbitant privilege. We were special, or so we thought. In the year 2000, China's economy was about $1.2 trillion. The U.S. economy was over $10 trillion. We were 8 times larger. China was a poor, developing country. Everyone knew it. Fast forward to today. China's economy is over $17 trillion. They're the world's largest manufacturer. They build most of the world electronics, furniture, clothing, and machinery. They have more people in their middle class than America has people total. And they've been watching America print money, watching America run up debt, watching America use the dollar as a weapon. Because that's what we've been doing. When Russia invaded Ukraine, what did America do? We froze Russian assets held in dollars. We kicked Russian banks out of the SWIFT system, which is the network that processes international dollar transactions. We weaponized the dollar. And every other country in the world saw that and thought, if America can do that to Russia, they could do it to us. China saw it. India saw it. Brazil saw it. Saudi Arabia saw it. For the first time, countries started seriously asking, do we really want to be this dependent on US dollars? China and Russia started trading oil in yuan instead of dollars. India started accepting rupees for oil payments. Brazil and China created direct currency exchange agreements, cutting out the dollar middleman. The Saudis, our oldest allies in the Middle East, started accepting yuan for oil sales. These are small steps, but they're happening. The dollar's dominance is being questioned for the first time in 50 years. Meanwhile, look at what China has been doing with their money. They've built 25,000 miles of high-speed rail in the last 15 years. America has built zero. They've created entire new cities from scratch. They've lifted 800 million people out of poverty. They've become the world leader in solar panels, electric vehicles, and battery technology. What has America been doing? Paying interest on our debt, fighting forever wars in the Middle East, arguing about who should use which bathroom. Our infrastructure is falling apart. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives U.S. infrastructure a C- grade. We have bridges that are structurally deficient, water systems from the 1800s, an electrical grid that can't handle modern demand. Our education system ranks in the middle of the pack globally. Our healthcare costs twice as much as any other developed country, but delivers worse outcomes. Our life expectancy is dropping. Now, here's where it gets really worrying. Let's talk about interest rates. For most of the 2010s, interest rates were basically zero. The government could borrow money almost for free. If you had $35 trillion in debt, but you were paying 2% interest, that's manageable. Expensive, but manageable. But in 2022, inflation came back with a vengeance. The Federal Reserve had to raise interest rates to fight it. And suddenly, the government's interest payments exploded. We're now paying over $600 billion per year just in interest. Within 5 years, we're projected to be paying over $1 trillion per year. Just interest, not paying down the debt. Just the cost of having borrowed the money. That's more than we spend on defense. It's more than we spend on all non-defense discretionary spending combined. It's becoming the single largest item in the federal budget. And here's the nightmare scenario that keeps economists up at night. What happens when the debt gets so large that investors start to worry? Right now, U.S. Treasury bonds are considered the safest investment in the world. Safer than anything. When you buy a Treasury bond, you're lending money to the U.S. government, and the assumption is that you'll definitely get paid back. But what if people stop believing that? What if China decides to dump its holdings of U.S. bonds? What if investors demand higher interest rates to compensate for the risk? If interest rates on government debt go up by just a few percentage points, the interest payments become unpayable. The government would have to either print massive amounts of money, causing hyperinflation, or default on the debt, destroying the dollar's credibility forever. Either option would be catastrophic. And we'd be in that scenario not because of one bad decision, but because we spent decades building a system that required constant growth, constant borrowing, constant new money. Just like Rome. Now, before we go full apocalypse, let's hear the other side. Because there are serious people who look at these same numbers and say, this is fine. Their argument goes like this. Yes, America has $35 trillion in debt. But America also has a $27 trillion economy. The debt to GDP ratio is about 130%. Hi, yes. But Japan's ratio is over 260%, and Japan is fine. Italy is over 140%. France is over 110%. Countries can function with high debt levels if they manage them correctly. The US dollar is still the world's reserve currency. We can borrow at lower rates than anyone else. We have the most productive economy in human history. We have the best universities, the most innovative companies, the strongest military. Look at what America creates. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, SpaceX, NVIDIA. The entire artificial intelligence revolution is being led by American companies. The next generation of biotechnology? American. Quantum computing? American. Space exploration? American. The defenders say that debt isn't inherently bad. Debt is a tool. If you borrow money to invest in things that produce future growth, education, infrastructure, research, that debt pays for itself. It's only bad debt if you borrow to consume rather than invest. They point out that U.S. debt was 120% of GDP after World War II, and we grew our way out of it. The economy boomed in the 1950s and 60s, and the debt ratio fell without U.S. having to pay it all off. They also note that a lot of the debt is actually owed to ourselves. Social Security holds a massive amount of Treasury bonds. The Federal Reserve holds Treasury bonds. American citizens and institutions hold the majority of the debt. We owe it to ourselves. And as long as the world runs on dollars, as long as global trade is conducted in dollars, as long as central banks hold their reserves in dollars, America has a unique position. We're not like other countries. The rules are different for us. This is the optimistic case. And it's not crazy. These are smart people with real credentials making these arguments. But here's what worries me about this view. Every empire in history, at its peak, had smart people explaining why they were different, why the old rules didn't apply to them, why their empire would last forever. The Romans thought they were eternal. The British thought the sun would never set on their empire. The Ottomans ruled for 6 centuries and thought they'd rule for 6 more. They were all wrong. Let's bring this down from the macro level to something more real. Because the scariest thing about debt isn't just the big numbers. It's what we're giving up by having it. Every dollar we spend on interest payments is a dollar we can't spend on something else. $600 billion in interest payments. Imagine what we could do with that money. We could make public college free for every American student. Cost about $80 billion per year. We could fix every structurally deficient bridge in America. Cost about $125 billion one time. We could provide universal pre-K. Cost about $30 billion per year. We could cut child poverty in half. Cost about $100 billion per year. Do all of those things, and we'd still have over $250 billion left over. Every single year. Instead, that money goes to bondholders. It vanishes into interest payments. It's gone, producing nothing, helping no one, building nothing. But it gets worse. The debt creates political paralysis. Every time someone proposes solving a problem, the first response is, how are we going to pay for it? Want to address climate change? Too expensive. Want to fix healthcare? Can't afford it. Want to rebuild infrastructure? Where's the money going to come from? The debt becomes an excuse for inaction. We can't do anything big anymore because we're already committed to paying interest on past spending. And here's maybe the most unfair part. The people who will really pay for this are young people. Americans under 30. They didn't create this debt. They didn't vote for the politicians who spent the money. But they're the ones who will live with the consequences. They're inheriting an economy where housing is unaffordable because of decades of bad policy and debt-driven inflation. Where good jobs require a college degree that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where starting a family feels financially impossible. Where retirement seems like a joke. In 1970, the median home cost about twice the median income. Today, it costs about 8 times the median income. In 1970, you could pay for college with a part-time summer job. Today, the average student graduates with $30,000 in debt. The American dream used to be almost guaranteed if you worked hard. Now it feels like a lottery. And looming over all of this is the biggest financial time bomb in American history: entitlements. Social Security and Medicare are going broke. not in some distant future. Soon, Social Security's trust fund will be depleted by 2033. Medicare's hospital insurance trust fund runs out even sooner by 2031. When that happens, these programs will only be able to pay out what they take in through current taxes. Social Security benefits would have to be cut by about 20%. Medicare would face similar cuts. Tens of millions of Americans depend on these programs. They're not luxuries. They're survival. And they're going to face massive cuts in less than a decade unless something changes. To fix them, we need to either raise taxes significantly, cut benefits, or borrow even more money. Every option is politically toxic. So politicians pretend the problem doesn't exist. This is the hidden cost of debt. Not just the money we're spending now, but the future we're foreclosing. The problems we can't solve. The opportunities we're missing. The obligations we're going to break. So what happens next? No one knows for certain, but we can sketch out the most likely scenarios. Scenario 1. The muddle through. This is actually the most likely outcome in the near term. Nothing dramatic happens. We just keep doing what we're doing. Debt keeps growing. Interest payments keep growing. We keep borrowing more to pay the interest. America gradually gets poorer relative to the rest of the world. Our infrastructure keeps declining. Our social programs keep getting squeezed. Healthcare and education become even more expensive. The middle class keeps shrinking. It's not a collapse. It's a slow decline. Like Britain after World War II. They didn't collapse. They just gradually stopped being a superpower. By the 1970s, Britain was taking loans from the IMF. The empire that once ruled a quarter of the world was going hat in hand to the international community. That's what slow decline looks like. Detroit, Cleveland, communities that used to be vibrant and prosperous but are now shells of what they were. Except instead of just a few cities, it happens to the whole country. Scenario 2. The crisis. This is the dramatic version. Something triggers a loss of confidence in U.S. debt. Maybe China dumps its treasury holdings. Maybe a major debt auction fails. Maybe interest rates spike unexpectedly. Whatever the trigger, suddenly investors panic. They dump U.S. bonds. Interest rates skyrocket. The government can't afford to roll over its debt at the new rates. We face a choice, default or print money. If we default, the dollar loses its reserve currency status overnight. Global trade collapses because it all runs on dollars. It would be the worst financial crisis in human history, making 2008 look like a minor hiccup. If we print money to avoid default, we get hyperinflation. The dollar becomes worthless. Your savings vanish. Your paycheck becomes worthless between when you receive it and when you spend it. Society breaks down. This is the Weimar Germany scenario, the Zimbabwe scenario, the Venezuela scenario. It's horrible, but it's happened to countries before. And every single one of those countries thought it couldn't happen to them. Scenario 3. The reform. This is the hopeful scenario. Americans wake up to the problem before it's too late. We elect leaders who are willing to make hard choices. We reform entitlements. We raise taxes where needed. We cut spending where possible. We invest in growth. It would require sacrifice. Everyone would have to give up something. The wealthy would pay higher taxes. The middle class would pay more for healthcare. Retirees would get smaller benefit increases. The military would have to make do with less. But it's possible. We've done hard things before. We've made sacrifices before. In World War II, Americans accepted rationing, wage controls, and massive tax increases. They bought war bonds. They planted victory gardens. They did what needed to be done. The question is, do we still have that in us? Can we still make collective sacrifices for the common good? Or have we become too divided, too selfish, too short-term in our thinking? Scenario 4. The tech miracle. There's one more possibility. Maybe technology saves us. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, fusion energy, biotechnology. What if the next 20 years bring breakthroughs that dramatically increase productivity? What if AI automates enough work that economic growth explodes? If the economy grows fast enough, we could grow our way out of the debt. The debt stays the same size, but the economy gets much bigger, so the debt ratio falls. Tax revenue increases without raising tax rates because the tax base expands. This has happened before. It's how we dealt with World War II debt. The economy boomed, and the debt became manageable. But counting on a miracle is not a strategy. It's a prayer. And even if technology does advance rapidly, will the benefits be distributed broadly enough to increase tax revenue? Or will it just make a few tech billionaires even richer while everyone else struggles? Nobody knows. Here's what should terrify you. We're already seeing the warning signs. The same warning signs that appeared before every major empire fell. Warning sign 1, military overstretch. America has about 750 military bases in over 80 countries. We spend more on our military than the next 9 countries combined. We're committed to defending Europe through NATO. We're committed to defending Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan in Asia. We're fighting wars and operations in the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. Rome did the same thing. They stretched their military so thin that they couldn't adequately defend any frontier. When the barbarians finally attacked, there weren't enough legions to stop them. Britain bankrupted itself, trying to maintain a global empire after World War II. They had commitments everywhere, but resources nowhere. Eventually, they had to give it all up. We spend over $800 billion per year on defense. But is any of it making us safer? We lost in Afghanistan. We lost in Iraq. We spent 20 years and trillions of dollars and have almost nothing to show for it. Meanwhile, China is building a military specifically designed to challenge us in the Pacific. And we're spread so thin that we might not be able to respond effectively. Warning sign 2, political dysfunction. Late-stage Rome was consumed by political chaos. Emperors were assassinated regularly. Civil wars broke out constantly. Different factions fought for power while the empire burned around them. Sound familiar? America is more politically divided than at any time since the Civil War. We can't agree on basic facts, let alone solutions. Our elections are contested. Our institutions are under attack. We nearly had a constitutional crisis on January 6, 2021. Congress has an approval rating in the teens. Most Americans think the country is on the wrong track. Trust in institutions is at all-time lows. We can't pass budgets. We can't fix obvious problems. We just fight. And while we fight, China builds. They don't have to worry about midterm elections or filibusters or cable news fights. They can plan for decades and execute consistently. Warning sign 3, wealth inequality. Late Rome had massive wealth inequality. A tiny aristocratic class owned almost everything. The middle class had disappeared. Everyone was either super rich or desperately poor. The rich bought up all the land and forced small farmers into debt slavery. They used their wealth to avoid taxes. They used their political power to rig the system in their favor. In America today, the top 1% own about 32% of all wealth. The bottom 50% own about 2%. 3 Americans have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the country combined. CEO pay used to be about 20 times the average worker's pay. Now it's over 300 times. The wealthy use complex tax strategies to pay far less than their stated tax rate. Major corporations pay 0 federal income tax. Meanwhile, working people pay a larger share of their income than billionaires do. This isn't sustainable. When the system is rigged this badly, it collapses, either through reform or revolution, but it collapses. Warning sign 4, bread and circuses. Rome kept people distracted with free food and entertainment while the empire crumbled. They put on bigger and bigger spectacles at the Colosseum. More gladiators, more exotic animals, more blood and drama. As long as people were fed and entertained, they didn't notice that their civilization was dying. We're America's bread and circuses. Social media, streaming services, professional sports, celebrity gossip, partisan news that confirms our biases and makes us angry at the other side. We're the most entertained, most distracted people in human history. We can watch anything, anytime. We can scroll endlessly through content designed to keep us engaged, to keep us clicking, to keep us from thinking too hard about anything real. Meanwhile, Our infrastructure crumbles. Our debt grows. Our problems multiply. But as long as Netflix has new shows and Twitter has new drama, we don't really pay attention. Warning sign 5. The loss of civic virtue. Early Rome was built on civic virtue. Citizens were expected to serve the republic, to sacrifice personal gain for the common good, to put Rome first. By late Rome, that was gone. Everyone was out for themselves. Corruption was everywhere. Nobody trusted anyone. The idea of serving the public good was a joke. In 1960s America, when JFK said, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country," people responded. They joined the Peace Corps. They supported space exploration. They believed in collective purpose. Today, we can barely agree on what country we want to be. We don't trust our neighbors. We don't trust our institutions. We don't believe in anything bigger than ourselves. Voter turnout in local elections is often below 20%. Most people can't name their congressman. We've outsourced civic engagement to posting on social media and arguing with strangers online. A republic requires citizens who care about the republic. When that's gone, the republic doesn't last long. Let's go back to Rome one more time, because there's a lesson here that we need to understand. Rome didn't fall because of one thing. It wasn't just the debt. It wasn't just the military overstretch. It wasn't just the political chaos or the inequality or the loss of values. It was all of it, together, reinforcing each other, creating a system that couldn't sustain itself. The debt made them debase the currency. The debased currency caused inflation. The inflation destroyed the economy. The destroyed economy couldn't fund the military. The underfunded military couldn't defend the borders. The undefended borders let in the barbarians. Each problem made every other problem worse. And at a certain point, the spiral became unstoppable. Here's the terrifying truth. The Romans knew they were in trouble. It's not like they didn't see it coming. They had smart people. They had historians who understood the patterns of rise and fall. But they couldn't fix it, because fixing it would require powerful people to give up power. It would require rich people to pay more taxes. It would require citizens to accept lower benefits and harder times. And nobody wanted to do that. So they kept kicking the can down the road. They kept borrowing and spending. They kept debasing the currency. They kept hoping that somehow things would work out. They didn't. Now, look at America. We know we have a debt problem. We know we have an entitlement crisis coming. We know our infrastructure is crumbling. We know our political system is dysfunctional. We know all of this, but we're not fixing it, because fixing it would require sacrifice. It would require giving up benefits. It would require paying more taxes. It would require doing things that are politically unpopular. So instead, we kick the can down the road. We borrow more. We spend more. We print more money when we need to. We tell ourselves that we're different, that the old rules don't apply, that somehow we'll figure it out. But we're not different. No empire is different. The rules of mathematics and human nature apply to everyone. Rome thought they were eternal. They called their empire Roma Aeterna, eternal Rome. That empire lasted about 500 years in the West, 1,500 years in the East. And then it was gone. The British Empire ruled a quarter of the world. They thought they'd rule forever. Within 70 years of their peak, they were a middle power borrowing money from former colonies. The Soviet Union was a superpower that could destroy the world. Everyone thought the Cold War would last forever. Then in 1991, the Soviet Union simply ceased to exist. 70 years from revolution to dust. America has been the dominant world power for about 80 years. That's less time than Rome had. Less time than Britain. About as much time as the Soviets. History suggests our time is limited. The only question is, do we manage our decline gracefully, or do we collapse catastrophically? Let's talk about some things that politicians won't tell you. Hard truths that everyone knows, but nobody wants to say out loud. Hard truth 1. We can't afford everything. We can't have a massive military that defends the world, generous social programs for everyone, low taxes, and balanced budgets. The math doesn't work. Something has to give. Either taxes have to go up significantly, or benefits have to go down significantly, or we have to make major cuts to defense, or we have to accept much higher debt levels and hope nothing goes wrong. Those are the only options. Everything else is fantasy. Hard truth, too. The bill is coming due soon. The Social Security and Medicare trust funds run out in less than a decade. That's not a maybe. That's locked in. The math is clear. When that happens, something dramatic has to change. Benefits will be cut, or taxes will be raised, or we'll borrow trillions more. There's no way around it. If you're under 50, you probably won't get the Social Security and Medicare benefits you've been promised. Not at current levels. The money won't be there. You've been paying into these systems your whole working life, but when it's your turn to collect, the cupboard will be bare. Hard truth 3. Your savings are at risk. If the U.S. goes into a debt crisis, your savings will be affected. If we have high inflation to reduce the real value of the debt, your dollars will buy less. If interest rates spike, your bond holdings will crash. If the stock market panics, your 401k will tank. There's no safe place to hide. Because the U.S. dollar and U.S. financial markets are the bedrock of the global financial system. If that bedrock cracks, everything built on it comes tumbling down. People with assets will lose wealth. People without assets will lose opportunities. Everyone loses. Hard truth 4. This is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. Both parties have contributed to this mess. Republicans cut taxes without cutting spending. Democrats increase spending without raising taxes enough to pay for it. Both sides campaign on fixing the debt, then add to it once in power. Both sides protect their preferred spending. Both sides refuse to compromise. The truth is, the policies both parties prefer are unaffordable. We can't have Republican-level taxes with Democrat-level spending. We also can't have Democrat-level spending with Republican-level taxes. But both parties promise exactly that. Because telling the truth loses elections. Hard truth 5. The American people share the blame. Politicians don't operate in a vacuum. They respond to voters. And American voters consistently say they want the government to do more while taxing them less. We want good schools, but we don't want to pay for them. We want maintained roads, but we oppose gas taxes. We want Social Security and Medicare, but we oppose raising the retirement age. In poll after poll, Americans say the deficit is a serious problem. But when asked what should be cut, they oppose cutting anything except foreign aid, which is barely 1% of the budget. We want a free lunch. And we get angry at politicians who tell us there's no such thing. The problem isn't just in Washington. It's in all of us. We've become a nation that wants everything but refuses to pay for anything. So here we are. $35 trillion in debt and climbing. Interest payments consuming more and more of the budget. Warning signs everywhere. And still, we do nothing. The question is, what are we going to do about it? We have maybe a decade, maybe less, before the crisis becomes unavoidable. Before the trust funds run dry. Before the interest payments become so large that they crowd out everything else. Before foreign creditors lose faith in the dollar. We can choose managed decline. Accept that America won't be the superpower anymore. Pull back from our global commitments. Focus on taking care of our own people. Let other countries handle their own problems. That means a smaller military. It means less global influence. It means other powers filling the vacuum we leave. China probably becomes the dominant power in Asia, maybe the world. But it also means we can afford to take care of people at home. We can invest in infrastructure, education, healthcare. We can actually fix our problems instead of just managing crises. Or we can choose reform. Real, painful reform. Raise the retirement age gradually. Means test Social Security so wealthy retirees get less. Let Medicare negotiate drug prices. Raise taxes on the wealthy and corporations. Cut defense spending. Reform the tax code to close loopholes. None of these things is popular. All of them will make powerful people angry. But together, they could actually solve the problem. We could stabilize the debt, save the entitlement programs, and still invest in the future. It would require both parties to compromise. It would require the American people to accept some pain now to avoid catastrophe later. It would require thinking beyond the next election cycle. Is that possible? Honestly, it's hard to be optimistic. Our political system seems incapable of that kind of long-term thinking. Or we can choose denial. Just keep doing what we're doing. Keep borrowing. Keep spending. Keep hoping something will save us. Technology, maybe. Growth, somehow. A miracle. This is the path we're currently on. And it ends badly. Maybe not next year, maybe not in 5 years, but eventually. The math catches up. The creditors lose faith. The crisis hits. And when it does, the pain will be much worse than if we dealt with it earlier. You're probably feeling pretty helpless right now. This is a huge systemic problem. What can one person do? More than you think. First, educate yourself. Understand the issue. Read beyond the headlines. Look at the actual numbers. Don't just listen to people who tell you what you want to hear. Second, vote. Not just in presidential elections, but in every election. Local, state, federal. Vote for candidates who take this seriously. Who offer real solutions, not just promises. Who are willing to make hard choices. Third, contact your representatives. Tell them this matters to you. Tell them you're willing to accept some sacrifice if it means solving the problem. Tell them you'll support them if they show political courage. Politicians respond to pressure. If enough people make this a priority, they'll have to respond. Fourth, prepare personally. Don't panic, but be smart. Diversify your savings. Don't assume the future will look like the past. Think about what skills will be valuable in a changing economy. Invest in education, in yourself, in your community. Fifth, build community. When systems break down, communities survive. Get to know your neighbors. Support local businesses. Volunteer. Create networks of mutual aid. Strong communities can weather storms that destroy isolated individuals. And finally, don't give up hope. America has faced huge challenges before and overcome them. The Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement. We've done hard things. We could do hard things again, but only if we choose to. So is a U.S. debt bubble the new Rome? The honest answer is, maybe. The parallels are disturbing. The warning signs are there. The trajectory looks bad. But Rome's fall wasn't inevitable until it was. There were moments when reform was possible, when different choices could have saved the empire. America is at one of those moments now. We can still choose a different path. We can still reform. We can still solve this. But the window is closing. In 10 years, maybe less, the choices will be made for us. The crisis will decide. And crisis decision-making is always worse than careful planning. Every empire falls eventually. That's the lesson of history. No civilization lasts forever. The question isn't whether empires fall, but how they fall. Do they collapse in chaos and violence? Or do they transition gracefully into something new? Rome collapsed. Britain transitioned. Which path will America take? That depends on choices we make right now. Today, this year, before it's too late. $35 trillion. Growing by $1 million every 30 seconds. The numbers don't lie. The math doesn't care about politics or wishes or hopes. We can face this now on our terms. Or we can face it later when the terms are dictated to us. The choice is ours, but not for much longer. Rome had its day. Now it's ruins. What will America be? That's the question of our time. And the clock is ticking.